Sister Wives fans are reacting with shock and heartbreak as new details emerge about Kody Brown's disastrous honeymoon with Kody. If you thought you knew everything about the Sister Wives story, the book written by Kody will make you realize just how much was hidden beneath the surface. And one of the most shocking and heartbreaking confessions she makes is about her honeymoon with Kody Brown. A time that should have been filled with love, joy, and the promise of a future together, but instead turned into a preview of the pain and neglect that would define her marriage for decades. Kody recalls in vivid detail that while most brides spend their honeymoon basking in attention and intimacy, she felt cast aside almost immediately, left wondering why she had to fight for her husband's affection at a moment that was supposed to belong entirely to them. Instead of creating memories as a newly married couple, Kody describes feeling like an extra in her own life, watching as the mind and heart of Kody were already drifting elsewhere, already concerned with appearances, already thinking about other women, already distracted by ambitions that had nothing to do with building a foundation with her. What stings the most in Kody's telling is how much she wanted to believe in the dream, how much she wanted to create a bond, and how quickly those hopes began to fade when she found herself sitting in silence, wondering if her husband even saw her as his partner or just another piece in the larger puzzle of his carefully crafted image. Fans online have reacted with outrage, with many saying that this revelation makes them rethink everything they watched on Sister Wives because it proves that Kody was never treated as an equal, not even in the very beginning. Some are calling it emotional abandonment, some are calling it manipulation, and many are saying it explains why Kody eventually had the courage to walk away. The honeymoon is supposed to be a foundation for a lifetime, but for Kody, it was the start of decades of sacrifice and loneliness, and her book lays out just how much that early experience damaged her confidence and set the stage for years of imbalance in her marriage. When you look at how Kody flaunted his connection with Robin years later, or how he dismissed the feelings of Kody on camera, you begin to see that this pattern was there all along, even back in those first days when they should have been building intimacy and trust. Kody writes that she tried to push down her feelings, that she told herself it was part of plural marriage, and that she needed to accept her place. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong, and the audience can feel her heartbreak through every word. This is not just a revelation about a bad trip or a disappointing moment. This is Kody opening the door to show us that from the beginning, Kody was incapable of giving her the love she deserved, and instead she was forced to smile for the cameras and play the role of the dutiful wife, while her heart quietly broke behind the scenes. Reading her words, fans say they are filled with anger at Kody, but also with admiration for Kody, because it takes courage to admit that your honeymoon was not a dream, but a nightmare, and it takes even more strength to turn that pain into a story that can help other women recognize the signs of neglect in their own lives. The honeymoon is supposed to be a time of connection, intimacy, and shared dreams for the future. But for Kody, it was a harsh awakening, a silent betrayal that set the tone for the years to come. She didn't just lose her honeymoon, she lost a chance at a loving partnership, a truth that resonates with anyone who has ever had their feelings dismissed or ignored. Her story is a reminder that even in the face of public scrutiny and unrealistic expectations, it's essential to prioritize your own emotional well-being and walk away from relationships that fail to nurture your soul. The more details Kody reveals about that painful honeymoon, the deeper our disappointment in Kody becomes. It was not just about being ignored or forgotten in a moment that should have been about building intimacy. It was about the message sent by Kody without ever saying it out loud. A message that told her she would never be his priority. Not then, and not ever. Fans who read that chapter of her book immediately connect it to so many moments from Sister Wives when Kody swallowed her emotions or tried to laugh away her pain, and now they understand it was not just a television act, but a habit formed from the earliest days of her marriage. She learned that trip that voicing her needs would not bring closeness. It would only widen the distance, and that lesson shaped her actions for decades. Kody writes about long nights of silence, meals eaten without warmth, and the heavy realization that she was already competing for something that should have been given freely, the love and attention of her husband. That awareness broke her spirit, but it also forced her to wear a mask, to hide her pain behind a smile, and to convince herself that she could endure a marriage that was already cracking at the foundation. He spoke endlessly about his responsibilities, his vision for the family, and his duty to God, but almost never about her, never about the two of them, and never about how to nurture the relationship they had just begun. Viewers looking back describe this as emotional and spiritual neglect, because while Kody often claimed to live by faith, his actions showed that his faith was mostly a shield to protect his ego and justify his neglect. On that honeymoon, Christine was not treated like a beloved bride, but like another part of a system Kody was building, a system that demanded obedience but offered no intimacy. The emotional starvation of those early days took a toll that Christine carried for years, and when she describes it in her book, readers can feel the decades of silence that weighed on her heart. She admits that she tried to focus on positive thoughts, reminding herself of the sisterhood and the idea that plural marriage was about sacrifice and devotion, but she could not shake the feeling that she had been placed outside the circle of love even before her marriage had truly begun. That wound only deepened when Robyn entered the family because the favoritism that Christine had suspected on her honeymoon became clear for the world to see. Fans recall the way Kody showered Robyn with affection, the way he prioritized her needs above everyone else, and they now understand how those actions were not only painful in the moment, but also reopened the old wound Christine had carried since her honeymoon. This is not simply a behind-the-scenes look at reality television. It is a story that resonates far beyond the Sister Wives fanbase. Many viewers say this chapter destroys whatever credibility Kody had left, because it shows that the neglect was not something that developed later in the marriage. It was there from the very beginning. His excuses on the show, his attempts to shift blame onto his wives, all ring hollow once readers realize he had never been invested in Christine's happiness from the start. That trip, which should have been a foundation for a life together, instead became the beginning of her erasure. And now, by sharing her truth, Christine is reclaiming the power that Kody tried to take from her all those years ago. The bombshell revelation from Christine's book about her disastrous honeymoon with Kody Brown has left fans heartbroken and angry. When the book written by Christine shifts into the lasting impact of her honeymoon, the weight of those first days becomes undeniable, because what she experienced was not simply an awkward trip or a new couple learning how to adjust. It was the beginning of a cycle of emotional neglect that would shape the entire course of her marriage to Kody Brown. Christine explains that during that time she felt invisible, as though her presence was tolerated rather than cherished, and that realization sank deep into her heart. She writes about lying awake at night, wondering why her new husband showed no urgency to bond with her, why there was no sense of intimacy or joy, and why she already felt like she had been placed on the outside of a marriage that was supposed to welcome her in. For fans reading those words, the heartbreak is palpable, because many remember the years when Christine would smile through tears, when she would stand in the background while Kody lavished attention elsewhere, and when she seemed to shrink into herself, even as cameras followed her every move. The honeymoon revelation proves that this pattern did not emerge later, but was planted in those very first days, and it also helps explain why Christine eventually reached the breaking point that viewers witnessed in later seasons. She writes that she told herself again and again that plural marriage was about sacrifice, that her role was to endure, and that happiness would come if she remained patient. But the truth was that happiness never arrived because Kody never prioritized her. Instead, he built walls of excuses, constantly reminding Christine and the other wives that his decisions were guided by higher principles, when in reality, those principles seemed to apply only when they benefited him. Readers see how this dynamic played out repeatedly across the years, especially when Robyn entered the picture and became the center of Kody's attention. For Christine, that was the most painful confirmation of the feelings she had carried since her honeymoon, because everything she had feared came true in front of millions of viewers. The favoritism was not subtle, it was glaring, and it left Christine reliving the same loneliness she had first felt on what should have been a trip of joy. Fans online are pointing out that this kind of neglect is a form of cruelty, because it tells a woman that she is good enough to serve a role, but never good enough to be loved. That cruelty shaped Christine in ways that viewers did not always see, because she often hid her pain to protect her children and to preserve a sense of dignity. But in her book, she admits that she cried often. She questioned her worth, and she wondered how long she could survive in a marriage where her heart was invisible. What adds even more depth to her revelation is the way she connects her experience to the example she was setting for her children. She explains that as the years passed, she began to realize that her daughters were watching her accept neglect, and that awareness filled her with a new kind of pain. She wanted her children to see love, partnership, and respect, but instead, they saw her sidelined again and again, starting with a honeymoon that had no love story. That realization grew into a determination to change her life, and fans now understand that her choice to leave Kody was not only about saving herself, but also about breaking the cycle for the sake of her family. As Christine takes readers deeper into her story, the connection between the painful honeymoon and the larger breakdown of the sister wives' family becomes impossible to ignore because what started as private disappointment eventually grew into public conflict that viewers could not look away from. She explains that the quiet neglect she experienced in those early days built a wall that never came down, and that every attempt she made to reach Kody was met with excuses, diversions, or cold indifference. That pattern repeated itself so often that Christine began to feel like she was speaking into a void, as though her feelings were echoes that never reached the man who was supposed to be her partner. Fans who watched the show remember countless scenes where Christine tried to open up, where she bravely expressed her needs, only to be dismissed or belittled. And now, with the context of her honeymoon, those moments take on new meaning. They were not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a marriage that was broken from the start. Christine writes that she began to notice how her pain was not only ignored, but sometimes used against her, because Kody would portray her as dramatic, ungrateful, or disobedient whenever she dared to speak her truth. That kind of gaslighting, Christine explains, is why she stayed quiet for so long, because every word she spoke became another weapon in the hands of a husband who never intended to hear her. Readers of her book are devastated by these admissions, because they recognize the same tactics in their own lives, or in the lives of women they know, and the parallels are heartbreaking. Christine's story has become a mirror for many fans, showing them how neglect and manipulation can be dressed up as faith, commitment, or family duty, when in reality it is simply about control. The public image of Kody as a devoted patriarch now looks hollow when compared to the private reality that Christine endured, a reality that began with a honeymoon void of intimacy and spiraled into decades of emotional starvation. The entry of Robyn into the family only magnified the hurt, because the favoritism that Christine feared from the beginning became undeniable, and fans now see that Christine's struggle was not about jealousy or insecurity, as it was sometimes portrayed on the show, but about surviving in a marriage where her husband made it clear that she was not wanted. The honesty of Christine's book strips away all excuses and leaves only the truth, a truth that shows how neglect breeds resentment, how favoritism breeds division, and how silence breeds despair. Viewers who once debated whether Christine was overreacting are now apologizing to her in spirit, saying they finally see the strength it took to survive as long as she did. Social media is filled with comments from fans who admit that they misjudged her, that they believed the narrative pushed by Kody, and that the honeymoon revelation proves she was telling the truth all along. The heartbreak of that trip was not just about being overlooked in a moment that should have been joyful. It was about realizing that her marriage would always be an uphill battle, a battle she would eventually lose if she did not choose herself. Christine makes it clear that the decision to leave Kody was not sudden. It was the result of years of pain layered on top of the first wound delivered during that honeymoon. She writes that the final straw came when she realized her children were growing up in the same environment of neglect, watching their mother be pushed aside again and again, and she knew she had to break the cycle for their sake. That realization gave her the strength she needed to walk away, and fans have praised her for showing not only bravery, but also wisdom in recognizing that love should never feel like erasure. In a way, Christine's book has become more than a personal memoir. It has become a guide for women everywhere who are struggling to find their own voice, and her honeymoon story is the cornerstone of that guide. It shows how early signs of neglect should never be ignored, because what begins as silence during a honeymoon can grow into years of loneliness and despair if it is not confronted. Fans say they are grateful for her vulnerability, because it gives them permission to confront their own realities, and many have shared stories of how they are leaving toxic relationships after reading her words. Christine's truth is no longer just about Kody or about sister wives. It is about the power of reclaiming your life, even when the world tells you to stay quiet. Her revelation about the honeymoon is proof that no matter how deeply pain takes root, it is never too late to pull yourself free. The final chapters of the book, written by Christine, are the most powerful yet, because it's a full circle moment. The story that began with a painful honeymoon where she was completely rejected by Kody concludes with a woman who has reclaimed her life and her happiness. It's a journey that began on that ill-fated trip where the neglect and disconnection started. Every attempt to heal and communicate was met with indifference, which led to years of disappointment and resentment. The heartbreak became too heavy to carry, but she chose to walk away. And in doing so, she discovered her strength and worth. The lessons learned on that honeymoon were not forgotten. In fact, they became the foundation for her to build a new life. Christine's triumph is evident in the way she took the pain of that trip and the rejection of her marriage and the years of silence and turned it into a catalyst for change. It's a testament to her resilience, and it inspires others to keep going when all hope seems lost. The final pages of her book show a life after Kody filled with joy, laughter, and love, not only for her, but for her children too. They see a mother who values her own worth and who will no longer settle for anything less than she deserves. For viewers who have been following along for years, the transformation is striking. The woman who once smiled through pain has now found a smile rooted in genuine peace. The honeymoon that once symbolized rejection has become the very reason for Christine's freedom.